Hello and welcome to today's session on ADHD teaching and learning strategies. I'm David Anthony and I'll be delivering the session today. Throughout today's session we're going to be looking at covering 4 areas. That includes exploring the facts about ADHD, looking at what individual challenges people might face, and the classroom challenges that the young person or teacher in that classroom might have to overcome. And then the key area of today's session is about interventions and strategies, and I'd like to share 8 of those with you so you can implement them and use them within your classroom, or things to consider and think about adapting for your environment and your learners. So if you've not met me before, a little bit about myself. I've worked in special educational needs since 2005, and I've been the head teacher of an independent special school for autistic learners, as well as the head of an adult service for autistic people between the ages of 19 and 25 who have significant barriers to independence and education. I've been a SENCo in a mainstream inner city London school, as well as an independent special school, and I hold the National Award for SEN Education Needs Coordination. And I've worked within behaviour analysis since 2015, and a lot of what we'll talk about today is through that behavioural lens, as well as other lenses, but as being someone who's worked within behaviour analysis, it does bring a lot to the type of interventions I look at implementing. I'm also registered with the UK SBA. I've studied at multiple universities, including Queen's, the Institute of Education, the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, and the University of the Arts London. And I founded the website Send Forward in 2024. The idea of that website is to bring together lots of different resources, service provisions and ideas for people who are looking for inspiration on how to help young people and their families overcome their barriers and challenges. And finally, I absolutely love dogs. I live down here in Southampton and own a golden retriever called Marshall. So like I say, Send Forward was founded in 2024, and we provide individual and group training as well as virtual training events, so both in person and online. And those are live events, unlike today, which is a recording, where you get to talk to other people who are attending, as well as ask questions in the moment rather than having to wait or email those afterwards. We provide outreach and consultancy to schools and local authorities, and that can be about individual learners or whole class settings, as well as coaching and supervision to senior leaders and SENCos who are looking to think about the direction of their own careers, but also the provision and support they're providing in their settings, and overcoming some of those challenges with mentoring and support. So kicking off the session on ADHD today, I thought we'd start off with some true or false questions. And the first one is, ADHD is a learning disability. True or false? And the answer is false. ADHD does not affect a person's ability to learn skills such as reading, writing or mathematics. Although some of the effects of ADHD, such as difficulty focusing, can cause challenges in learning, but it's not actually a learning disability. Question 2 is, ADHD is caused by vaccinations. True or false? And the answer is false. There is no evidence that vaccines cause ADHD. There was evidence published in 1998 linking vaccines to autism and ADHD, but this was based on falsified data for which the author lost his medical license. There was lots of multiple conflicts of interest, and the paper was later withdrawn. So ADHD isn't caused by vaccinations. Sugar and E numbers cause ADHD. True or false? Sugar and E numbers do not cause ADHD. There has been some link that E numbers can cause hyperactivity, but there's no evidence to suggest that it actually causes ADHD. Rather, it just, it makes those symptoms and indicators much more obvious. Question 4. ADHD is a mental health condition. So ADHD is not a mental health condition, although sometimes it's incorrectly listed as such. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition, so very different to a mental health condition. And that's really, really important when we come and think about the stigma attached to such conditions, and when we talk about ADHD, particularly as part of people's identity, and how they see themselves and their community. ADHD is considered a hidden disability. True or false? This one is true. ADHD is considered a hidden or an invisible disability, as it's sometimes called, as we can't always see the difficulty, or it's not immediately apparent. So walking down the street, if someone was coming towards you and they had a diagnosis of ADHD, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell. So we consider that a hidden disability. So when we come to diagnosis, it's an observational diagnosis. So it's people observing behaviours, learning about a person, which actually creates that diagnosis, rather than a blood test as such. So I hope those true and false questions were useful in just establishing some of the facts about ADHD. So let's dive a little bit closer and a bit deeper into ADHD. So ADHD is classified as a disorder that is defined through analysis of behaviour. There isn't a blood test, it's based on a collection of information from observational assessments. What people are looking for in a diagnosis is people with ADHD or are showing signs have a persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity, impulsivity, and interferes with day-to-day functioning and or development. And that's really, really crucial, that last bit, interferes with the day-to-day functioning and or development. So an impairment in a person's ability to do their day. And we're looking at hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattention. When we consider what we mean by inattention, there's several bullet points on the screen here for you. Just picking some of those out. Often fails to give close attention to details or makes careless mistakes in schoolwork or other activities. Often does not seem to listen when spoken to directly. Has trouble holding attention on tasks or play activities. Often has trouble organising tasks and activities, and does not follow through on instructions and fails to finish schoolwork, often losing focus or getting sidetracked. Often avoids, dislikes, or is reluctant to do tasks that require mental effort over a long period of time. What I would say on that one is when we think about a person's motivation and how motivated or how much they really enjoy that task, it might not necessarily always be true. Often loses things or tasks and activities. So things like pencils, books, tools, wallets, keys, paperwork, anything associated with tasks can often go missing or get lost. Is often easily distracted and is often forgetful in daily activities. So when we're thinking about inattention, these are some of the areas that are often considered. So thinking about impulsivity and hyperactivity, so often fidgets with or taps hands or feet, squirms in the seat, so fidgeting in the seat, often leaves their seat in situations when remaining seated is expected, can run or climb in situations where it's not appropriate, unable to play or take part in leisure activities quietly, will often seem on the go or driven by a motor, will be talking excessively or blurt out answers before a question has been completed. often has trouble waiting their turn, and often interrupts or intrudes on others. So, for example, butting into conversations or a game and not really understanding turn taking or waiting their turn. So now we've got a good indication of some of the signs and indicators of ADHD. I want to move our focus slightly onto the challenges for parents. And parents are the key stakeholder when we think about supporting young people. They are often the people who know the young person or child the best, and they're the ones which have gone through the process of these challenges developing. And actually, we talk about challenges for a young person, but it has a ripple effect across the whole family where things are providing a challenge for a young person. It's not just that young person, it's the whole unit and family around that child. Some day-to-day activities might be more difficult for parents and children or the child, including getting your child to sleep at night. And sleep disorders are absolutely chronic for the whole family. We often think it's about the child not getting enough sleep and they'll be tired in the morning and struggle to do their work. But actually, we also then have a parent who hasn't got enough sleep, and it's going to affect their day and their ability to do their work or their responsibilities. And if the parent's awake, if there's siblings, it'll have a knock-on effect of, the quality of time they will get with their parents and their siblings and so forth. So a sleep disorder or trouble sleeping at night has this ripple effect across the whole family, and often we think it is just the child, but actually it's not. Getting ready for school on time. So if we think about some of those challenges we talked about on the previous slides about losing things and being in a rush and timekeeping, getting ready for school or appointments can be a real challenge. Listening to and carrying out instructions. If you think that someone has poor attention or different ways of attending, then listening to and carrying out multi-step instructions is going to be a real challenge. Being organized, being able to find things, being where you need to be, doing what you need to get done can all be a challenge. Social occasions, attending family events or events of friends and celebrations and so forth, can be a real challenge for parents who have children with additional needs and particularly ADHD. And also shopping. Shopping is full of huge distractions and opportunities for young children to get distracted and to, fail to attend to what the parent actually wants them to do. So for parents themselves, this is a very short list. There's only 6 items on there, and there are many, many more. But I just wanted to highlight some of the key challenges for parents and reminding the listener today that actually the parents are a key stakeholder in supporting the young person. So the prevalence of ADHD is thought to be around 5% in the UK, and that's for children. The gender split for ADHD is 3 boys to 1 girl, though this has been challenged and there are issues with assessments and diagnosis and how ADHD presents itself in girls compared to boys and boys compared to girls. And actually the ratio might be much closer than the 3 to 1. And we do know that historically girls have been underdiagnosed when it comes to autism and other difficulties. Staying on that topic of diagnosis and some of the challenges, some of the other barriers to assessment and why a child might not get an assessment of ADHD includes things such as race, culture and ethnicity, and different cultural views on disability, diagnosis, and what's socially acceptable, but also the cultural and barriers associated between professional and client, or patient and doctor, and all of those difficulties with communication and professionalism and so forth. Capacity. We know there's huge waiting lists at the moment for assessment, and wherever you are in the country it will vary hugely, but many health trusts are struggling with the assessment process and getting enough children through the assessment effectively. Language, where English is an additional language or a second language, or where families don't speak English, is going to be a huge difficulty in getting an assessment and their thoughts, feelings, and experiences across to professionals who are doing the assessment. And professionals such as GPs or SENCos and other professionals who support families might not necessarily have the training and awareness in ADHD or autism to really assist and advise a family on what the next steps are and how to get an assessment, and things might be missed. Location and time of assessments. Getting to assessments on time. We just talked about the difficulty in getting to places on time. And if a family miss an appointment, often it can be quite difficult to get that rescheduled and a second opportunity. An environment in which assessments take place can also be a barrier. We know that children in new environments might not say always perform typically how they would normally. So the environment can be a real challenge to get the typical view of what a child's behaviour and difficulties is like. Also, travel. The assessment might not be local, and getting to the assessment can be a huge challenge if you've got children with additional needs or disability. And also, there are some who will find getting a diagnosis embarrassing. There might be some guilt or shame associated with the process, and all of those can be barriers to actually wanting to get the assessment done and the diagnosis. But there are huge benefits of getting that diagnosis. One of them is relief and improved self-esteem, understanding why a child might be struggling and being able to clearly identify the why that has happened, and why they've got challenges or the world isn't quite catered to meet their needs. It can also provide a sense of belonging and sense of community with other people with a similar diagnosis. And by getting a diagnosis, a child can start often accessing early intervention and support, and the types of support and management available can be matched to the diagnosis. There's also a sense of empowerment, so going with that self-esteem, and a development of an identity. And we've seen this in society much more in recent years, that having a diagnosis really helps understand who a person is and how they look at themselves and how they feel about themselves, and being able to identify with other people. So starting to think about interventions and how we can support and help people who have an ADHD diagnosis overcome some of those barriers to education. I'd like to start off by sharing an understanding of behaviour and the 4-term contingency. And I'm sharing this as a backdrop to all of the other strategies and interventions I'd like to share with you today. But fundamentally, behaviour works in a 4-part process. And I'd like to take us through each of those processes and steps today. And then when we start talking about interventions, they'll make a lot more sense in this context of the 4-term contingency. So the first stage is the setting events, or context and motivation. And setting events should be considered in their largest context and sense. So setting events are things that are likely to increase or decrease the likelihood of a trigger or an antecedent causing a behaviour. And that can be our learning history, how things have gone in the past, how we feel about things, what trauma we've experienced in our family or in our education. But it can also be more immediate things. So what's our access to reinforcement or our previous success been like most recently? Have we had access to our favourite things? Did we eat breakfast? Did we sleep well? Do we have health challenges? or are there safeguarding issues and difficulties and trauma which contribute to how we present day to day? So setting events should be considered in a wider sense, and what's gone in the past will increase or decrease the likelihood of triggers causing a behaviour. So setting events, like we said, will make a trigger or an antecedent much more likely or less likely. And the trigger is what results in a behaviour. And I'm sure if you've worked in education or in a classroom or in a school, you will be used to talking about what a child's trigger is or what the antecedent of a behaviour is. But the key point to this is that every single behaviour a child or human demonstrates has a function. No behaviour happens by accident. And as soon as you come to terms with that and come to accept that every behaviour has a function, you can start looking at children's behaviour slightly different, and whether they're trying to communicate something to you, whether they're finding the environment too stressful, whether they're finding a demand or task you set them too challenging. It's all about the why, the function of a behaviour. I've listed the key ones there for you. So sensory, that might be the environment is too loud or not loud enough. It might be too dark or too light, too cold or too hot. But the actual environment is causing the child discomfort, which can promote behaviour where the child is going to want to adapt or leave that environment. That moves us on to escape, or avoidance of demand. And demand can be from the environment, from a person, from a place, from a thing. But the key there is that the function of the behaviour is to escape that demand or avoid it. Behaviour can be used to get people's attention. And we've seen in the past with children that it's not necessarily praise, but any adult attention or attention of peers, as well as tangibles. So want something they can have or can't have, but behaviour can be related to the desire to have things. Fundamentally, we always have to rule out a behaviour is not linked to a medical cause or a medical reason, and investigating that in the first instance is most important, and making sure the child is well and well cared for is absolutely crucial. And depending on the consequence, we're either likely to increase the likelihood of a behaviour or decrease it, and that's very much linked to the consequence. So for the trigger, it's going to increase the likelihood of a behaviour. So antecedents are crucial in understanding the likelihood of that behaviour. We actually have then the behaviour itself. And this is something that is observable. The topography is what the behaviour looks like. So is it running away, hitting, biting, spitting, throwing objects, being destructive, going quiet, not responding? What can we see? What does the behaviour look like? Fundamentally, we're most crucially interested in the safety and risks associated with that behaviour and the control measures what are in place to make sure that young person, the people who are supporting, and the other peers in that classroom are safe and well looked after. What we're interested in is in the frequency, how many times it happens in a specific period, and how long each of those behaviour episodes lasts for. And by collecting data, so we can use things such as an ABC chart, which I'll include in the resources, to actually track when the behaviour happens. Is it always in the same environment? Is it always at the same time of day? Is it always with the same teacher, or when they do a certain piece of work? Is it when they're asked to do something or not had access to something? And by tracking behaviour and the occurrence of what happens before and what happens afterwards, we can really start breaking down what that function might be. And finally, the environment, who and where, like I say, is super important. Does the behaviour always occur with the same person? Because that child knows if they do A, they'll get B and C, D, E. Really, really important. The consequence related to that behaviour, so what happens after that behaviour has occurred, is really, really important about whether the behaviour is going to increase or decrease in the future. Did that behaviour result in the child gaining reinforcement, access to something that they wanted? Or did it result in a sanction or a punishment, such as detention or timeout or being sent out of the classroom, or denied access to what they were trying to get? Whatever comes after a behaviour will either increase or decrease the likelihood of it happening again. And it's really, really important when tracking ABCs and behaviour to really think about what the consequence was. What did they get access to? Did they avoid the task that they were being asked to do, or did they get the teacher's attention when that's what they were seeking? So I've put together a brief example here of that full-term contingency. So in the last maths lesson, Pete got 1 out of 5 questions correct. So that's our setting event. In the past, Pete's really struggled to have success in his maths lesson, and we can establish how that might leave him feeling. So the antecedent, Pete is in maths and given instructions to complete a maths worksheet independently. Pete's response to this is to continuously drop the maths worksheet on the floor and doesn't complete any of the questions. So the consequence is Pete is moved on the star chart, so this is this particular behavioural method in the classroom, and misses break time, so has a sanction applied. So we can look at that same situation again, but with a different consequence and a different behaviour. So again, Pete struggled in the past to succeed in maths. He's going into maths with low self-worth when it comes to maths, poor self-esteem, and not considering himself great at this lesson. He's given a worksheet to complete independently, but instead of dropping his sheet on the floor, he's been provided with a help card, so he can use this to get his teacher's attention. By using that help card, by displaying that behaviour, Pete is given 5 minutes of one-to-one attention with his teacher, and this helps Pete complete the work, and he receives lots of praise, remains on the star chart, and gets to go to break. So a very different outcome based on the consequences and the behaviour. But the teaching which has happened there is Pete's been taught to use the help card to get attention when he's struggling. So changing the narrative and his perception of maths. So if we look at this in the context of the function Pete was demonstrating there, it was very much avoidance, or we can suggest avoidance and escape motivated behaviours. And by giving Pete the skills or the resources to ask for help, he was able to avoid sanctions and get access to reinforcement and a sense of achievement, which will increase hopefully his motivation the next time he goes into maths. That full-term contingency fits nicely when we think about the behaviour curve. If you've not seen this before, this maps out how a behaviour might escalate, how it might calm down, what recovery triggers and setting events all look like during a behavioural episode. This works really well if you're familiar with zones of regulation. That can be overlaid with this quite nicely. But what this does show is that behaviours escalate over time. Very rarely does a trigger cause a behaviour without some sort of setting event taking place and without some build-up. Once we've reached crisis, once the behaviours that are of concern or of challenge are happening, it's then what return to calm looks like. And actually, sometimes you'll see in the red squiggly line on the right hand side there that sometimes it can take a long time for a child or a person to return to calm. And actually, they're quite sensitive to any further triggers, more sensitive than they were before they escalated. What's really, really key though is what calming looks like for that child, what activities help them feel more regulated and more settled, and what recovery actually looks like at the end, and what opportunities there are for debrief, to talk with adults, talk through what happened, how the setting events and triggers manifested themselves into the escalation of that behaviour. So one consequence of a behaviour is reinforcement. So access to something a child is motivated for, has a desire for, or a child wants. And I thought it'd be worth just explaining the difference between reinforcement and a reward. And often they're used interchangeably, and actually they don't mean the same thing. So rewards are generic and often standardized across a group of people. So a really good example is certificates for attendance, where every child gets an attendance certificate. But actually, only some of those children will apply value to that attendance certificate. And that's really, really key, because for a reward to actually work in increasing the likelihood of a behaviour reoccurring, it needs to be of value to that young person. And that's what reinforcement is. Reinforcers are, they can be people, places, or things that are of value to an individual. And that will increase the likelihood of behaviours reoccurring when a young person gets to access reinforcement. And reinforcement is impacted by motivation. So for something to be reinforcing, the frequency of access and duration is really key. So after eating, food will be less reinforcing to a person. That's really natural. If I've had breakfast, then I'm not going to be seeking food probably until lunchtime, but maybe a little bit sooner. If a child has spent 45 minutes playing on the iPad will lose its value over time, and the iPad will become less of an important item to the child. If the child hasn't seen their favourite person for a few days, motivation for that person will be high. And one thing we can do and should do constantly is preference assessments. And this isn't a big deal, it's just in the moment working out what the child is motivated for. And we can use that as part of the learning experience for that child. And I'm going to show you some examples now as we go through some of the strategies. Going with the flow. And this fits nicely with the idea of reinforcement as well. Don't fight against the natural preferences of the children you work with. If they are physical, want to be on their feet, using up their energy, then go with the flow, work with that. Design lessons or sessions that work towards that child's preference of learning. Okay, sometimes they will need to sit down and do work at a desk, but how you interweave different activities with different learning styles is really, really important. And having an opportunity to go with the child's flow and their preference, you're going to have much more success in keeping them engaged and on task. So, for example, a sensory seeking child or those with excessive motor activity and energy will learn easier environments that are more active. And this isn't rocket science or something that you probably haven't thought about before, but just saying it explicitly and acknowledging that actually working with the preferences within your class will really, really help build motivation and engagement. we all like to have a sense of responsibility or feeling like we're in charge and in control of our own lives. And a great way to embed that into our teaching and learning is to give pupils a job or a tasks that allow them to actively control part of the lesson that they're part of. And this can be simple things like keeping track of the time or the number of correct answers, taking part in the register, whatever little small responsibilities that can be delegated to pupils can give them an opportunity to engage and be part of that lesson. Rather than everything being done to them, they get an opportunity to be part of it, actively engaged. I'm a huge fan of traffic lights unless I'm in the car and we have to stop at them. But in the classroom, traffic lights are a great opportunity to encourage learners to stop, think, then act. And I've seen this done in lots of different ways. So teachers have got different lights or just laminated sheets of paper or things on the whiteboard. But using a traffic light system can really, really signify to the class that you want them to stop what they're doing, to spend some time thinking, and then act. On an individual basis, it can be really good just to put a full stop on a behaviour or on a situation where you can use the red. Okay, we're going to stop now. We're going to move to yellow or amber and think about what we can do. What are the next steps we should do? How can we change the situation or the direction in which things are going? And then green, we get to act upon that. And then if you wrote that into the 4-term contingency, gives you the opportunity to provide encouragement and motivation further through reinforcement. But during times of impulsivity or impulsiveness, this can be a really good tool to use. Lots and lots of schools are now using now and next boards in their teaching. So if you're not familiar with now and next boards, it's basically a sheet which has what we're doing now and what we're doing next. And the idea is to provide reassurance to that young person what's coming up next, how long this current activity is going to take, and what they need to prepare for in the future. These are absolutely great and provide a lot of reassurance to learners. What I would say is if you've got now and next boards which have two less preferred activities on the board at the same time together, adding when they have access to a preferred activity is really, really crucial. So if you have a child who's really struggling at maths and English, and that's all what's on their now and next board, you're really, really going to struggle to get them engaged in using that board because there's nothing there appealing or what they feel they're going to succeed at. But if you had maths, English playtime or break, or maths, English computers, if that's a preferred activity, then that now next board is going to be a lot more interesting to that learner. Also, adding visual timers, countdowns, really, really helps with transition and the ending of things and moving on to the next thing. And also allowing that person to understand how long they need to hold their concentration on this activity for. So one of the personal favourites of mine is using token economies. A token economy is a system for providing positive reinforcement to a child or children by using tokens for completing tasks or behaving in desired ways. Pupils collect tokens or ticks, which they then get to use and build towards a terminal reinforcer. What the idea is those ticks and tokens provide the immediate reinforcement. They're of value to that child because they know it works towards a bigger idea. I use this in a mainstream classroom. I taught year 7 English to a nurture group where every single child in that class was on the SEN register at the time. and they all had their own individual challenges. And as a teacher with only one learning support assistant, that classroom was extremely challenging in getting them to meet just the school's expectations of what they should do when they enter a classroom. So I used the token economy system whereby I could positively identify the behaviours I wanted to see. And I'll show you what that looks like. As you can see, it's a really simple template. This is the actual one I used. Their name, what they're working for. So in this particular context, they would work for like Willy Wonka style golden tickets. And the children with the most golden tickets in the school got to go to a theme park. But to get a golden ticket, you had to go above and beyond the normal expectations of the classroom. I had a whole class of children who were struggling to meet the basic expectations of school. So what I wanted to do was devise a system where these learners could access a golden ticket through demonstrating the classroom expectations and going above and beyond. So rather than spending my lesson going, you need to do this, you need to do that, well, sit down, do this, do that. So just constantly placing demands and instructions on the children, I adapted a process of identifying children who were behaving in the expected way and providing them ticks. And at first they would get a tick and a well done. I wouldn't say what it was for, I would just give them the tick. And this had a knock-on effect around the classroom where other children started to recognise what that child behaviour was and what they got the tick for, and started to demonstrate it themselves. And suddenly I didn't even have to say well done. They all had a fresh token board at the start of every lesson, and as they sat down, started writing the date in their book and getting on with their starter activity, I was able to give out ticks for meeting the expectations of the classroom. By the end of the lesson or by the end of the week, they would work towards the golden ticket and be able to, on a Friday, go and put their golden ticket in the school box where they were counted. And it provided them with that terminal reinforcement, that opportunity to be part of the wider school behaviour management policy, but also being recognised for their good behaviour, the things meeting the expectations of that class, rather than focusing on sanctions, punishments for behaviours we didn't want to see. It's been a real crucial tool, and it's worked actually really well for early career teachers as well, who are just starting out with classes and they might have a class they're struggling with. It's a real good opportunity for that. But ticks or tokens are only used to reinforce behaviours. So we never take ticks away. We never give them crosses or use any sort of sanctions associated with the token board. As soon as you start adding negative feelings or emotions or attachments to that board, the child's just going to disengage. It's going to lose its value. They might rip it up, throw it away. They're not going to be interested. So it's only about positivity. So never take tokens away. You just don't give tokens to the behaviours you don't want to see. So finally, on token economies, just remember that the number of tokens required will be very individual to the learners you're teaching. So the frequency might need to be higher based on their abilities or their attention, their individual resilience, and consistency is crucial. So if you start to use token economies, you can't just stop. You need to explain to the child or the children why you're stopping or why things are changing, because it's their opportunity to get access to something that they want. So if you take that away suddenly, that's going to be a huge challenge. And also think about the time in which you want a token board to span. Is it just one lesson, 2 lessons, a whole week? Think about how the frequency needs to work for your learners. So the next strategy or intervention I would suggest you use are movement breaks. And I'm sure lots of you have heard about movement breaks, and the term is thrown around quite a lot at the moment. But the aim of movement breaks are to help create the level of alertness which enables a child to focus and concentrate. So things such as heavy muscle work may calm the over alert and wake up the under alert. Heavy work through the hands may also improve fine motor handwriting by increasing the hand strength and body awareness. So movement breaks can be at the start of a lesson, at the end of a lesson, in the middle of a lesson. The frequency will totally depend on the individual child or children you work with. But what I'd suggest is to actually use a specific intervention for movement breaks, and I'll share that with you. How Does Your Engine Run, or the alert program, it's quite an old program now, but it's something I've used quite successfully in the past. And it's about helping a child themselves understand their alertness. And this can work really well again with zones of regulation. It overlays very nicely. But the idea is we use an analogy of the car engine about how a child feels and whether they're running high or low, or just right. And actually there's things we can do if we are running high to reduce it to just right, or if we are running low to increase it to just right, by doing things that we taste, touch, move, listen, or things we can watch, the visuals around us. And I've, like I say, used this quite well for movement breaks in the past, and I'm thinking back to particularly a maths class I taught where again the whole class was had additional needs and on the SEN register, with a high proportion of children with an ADHD diagnosis. So what we would do before that maths lesson is I set up a circuit in the playground, and we would all take part in completing the circuit, having a good run around, literally just for 4 or 5 minutes, and then returning to the maths lesson, doing the maths, and then building in stretches, standing up, movements throughout the lesson to keep that engine just right. Where those learners were either too low or too high and needed to return just in the middle. How Does Your Engine Run? The alert program is lots of content online, lots of resources, and like I say, it fits quite nicely with things like the zones of regulation if that's something you're familiar with. The final thing I would like you to consider is probably one of the most obvious ones, but often overlooked or underutilized, and that is where you seat your children in the classroom. And if you're a teacher, I really encourage you to listen to your support staff about their feelings about classroom position, where a child's struggling, or their interactions with other children, or their environment. But if a child's easily distracted, having them in the right position in a classroom is absolutely essential. You want to be aware of windows, corridors, the types of pupils they're sat next to, their learning styles and profiles, what they can see in their eye line, where they are from the board, and how much engagement they are with the screen that you're delivering your content from. Classroom position can be changed and rotated, and try and test new positions that work for your learners. I don't feel like it's a done and done job in September. You can change and move children around. So classroom position, along with all of those other interventions, are really key. And on the screen there, I've listed all the 8 things that we have talked about in this session. So remembering that all behaviour has a function, it has a purpose, it doesn't happen out the blue, it will have happened for a reason, and determining that function will help you meet that child's needs. The more you go with the flow of a child's learning preference or learning style, the easier it's going to be on you, but also the more likely that child will stay engaged. Think about delegating responsibilities, giving children tasks to do which give them a sense of engagement and responsibility. They're part of the lesson rather than the lesson being done to them. Stop, think and act can be used in multiple ways, but it's a great full stop when things aren't going the way they should. Timers, now next boards, incorporating access to reinforcement when the child is going to have access to something that they really feel engaged and enjoy is really, really key when using now next boards, but also using timers, countdowns will all help to help engage that child and how long they need to show attention for. Token economies, I'm a real big fan. Token boards, working towards the school-wide behaviour policy, really, really key tool there. Movement breaks, but using evidence-based approaches for movement breaks, things like how does your engine run, alert program, zones of regulation, building those into the movement breaks rather than them just being generic timeouts. And finally, thinking about classroom position, where your children are sat, what they can see, what are they doing, who are they sat next to is really, really key. So I hope this short session on ADHD teaching and learning strategies has provided some insight into some of the things you could consider when trying to meet the needs of your learners. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on the session. My contact details are info@senforwarduk.com, or you can scan the QR code on screen and it'll take you to a feedback form, and I'd love to get your feedback, whether it be positive, areas for improvement, things you don't agree with in the training, or things you've tried which you think really work. I'd love to hear about. Thank you for listening today. Hope you'll be in touch, and I hope you found the session useful. Take care and goodbye.